Welcome viewers again to this exciting episode with my friend and one of the very good speakers, a famous personality, Abhijit Iyer, and we're going to discuss on this channel to how the diplomacy is being affected throughout the world through COVID-19 and who benefits what. Now, just viewers remind you that we are part of the Sattology Japa centers and meditation centers. So we put out this news for public interest only and also to gain your attention towards our projects in the US. So without fail, I'll get started. Welcome, Abhijit, again. And
Thank you for having me on.
it's always a pleasure to see you here. Always a pleasure.
Pleasure's all mine.
So Abhijit, this COVID-19, and we are in complete lockdown. This is, I think, almost the second week in California, and I think today the Virginia governor announced that there will be a complete lockdown in Virginia, and it is going to affect American elections in some way or the other. But we are all maintaining social distancing and everything. But what do you think is the diplomatic fallout for this, or which sides benefit? Because we see that China's economy is predicted to be low, but they are now booking huge amount of orders on masks and other things. And so who wins? So what is the global viewpoint that you can analyze?
Look, I don't think anybody actually wins because look at the orders coming in for China for China. Sorry, they're mostly low value items like masks and test kits and things like that. Most of which are failing, by the way. Which I've said this on this program and several other programs, and people never used to believe me. That China has absolute rubbish. Their quality control is rubbish, and this is one of the main reasons that they will never be able to graduate into a full first world economy. That said, India is going in for about 10,000 ventilators from China. This was reported day before yesterday, and I think that again is a disaster. It's going to have a lot of failures. But remember, the quantum of orders China is getting isn't that much. It's about totally, I'd say about $3 to $5 billion, which, for the cost that China has to bear in terms of shutting down its factories, now they're slowly starting up again, it isn't a win. Of course, the point here is that the rest of the world is going to take a far, far harder hit. And the thing here is that once the world starts up again, a lot of the demand is going to be for low quality, low value items, which China produces a lot of. So you'll see a short spike in that. But remember, these aren't Giffen goods or, conspicuous, inferior goods where, just because the prices come down, consumption will spike and things like that. Or even if the price goes up little, the consumption will stay the same because they're things like toilet paper and bulbs. Just because the price of bulbs has gone down doesn't mean you're going to buy 100 bulbs. Just because the price of toilet paper has gone down doesn't mean you're going to stack up on 100 rolls of toilet paper. So you're going to buy the same thing. So the economy is going to kind of come back to normal. But remember the amount of losses businesses have suffered. You're going to see a lot of layoffs and things like that, short-term layoffs. So you may actually see less demand. So even for China, this isn't really a very good thing. Of course, it's a lot worse for everybody else because they all have high value economies, and how they're going to recover from this remains to be seen. Maybe it can be a stimulus for the global economy. I'm not seeing that possibility at the moment, though.
So in US yesterday, the count crossed 200,000 people and affected, and the President Trump, the worst estimates was 2.2 million people in the US, and I'm sure it will be around 4. And so when the count crossed $200,000 people, and most of it came through, I think it has come through Europe, because between Europe and US there has been a lot of free travel between Spain, US, and Italy and other places. So do you think it was I don't want to give any indication that China is responsible as a country. Might be a mishap, something like that, but only the first world economies are affected, and we can see the impact is so do you think, was there a conspiracy behind the whole thing?
No, look, there is clear Chinese culpability. Today, reports have confirmed that it definitely originated in Wuhan, and it definitely came from bats and pangolins, possibly no, from bats, specifically one type of bat that was being experimented on in Wuhan. Now, if it is a bioweapon or not, we still don't have the research to say that, but there is a high chance. I mean, what are the chances that you have your bioweapons laboratory in the same city as where this thing starts? Now, it can be a coincidence or it cannot be a coincidence, but I think today's research finding that clearly nails it down to experimentation on bats says a lot. Now, I think China's culpability here is trying to suppress this, pretending that it could control this. I think it was more a case of guilt through negligent homicide, what you'd call in the US, negligent
Nice
homicide.
word. Yeah.
That's the word to be used. Though it started off as negligent homicide, there was culpability because then they went on trying to cover up, muscle other countries into suppressing information and things like that. So, there is negligent homicide on one side, and then there is also culpable homicide on the other side because they are clearly culpable in this,
Hmm.
right? The second person to blame here is the WHO, because remember, people who climb up the UN ladder, any of the UN things, they're not necessarily very good experts, but they're necessarily very, very good politicians. They
Correct.
know how to play politics. They know how to curry favors. They know how to play off one against the other. They know what needs to be done. It is a fundamentally corrupt system, right?
Right.
Because you need to keep a maximum number of people happy. And this particular gentleman, Dr. Theodros, he has a record in the past of suppressing Ethiopia's own pandemic record.
Mhm.
So, it doesn't surprise me at all. You also saw the interview where one of the, I think it was Aylard something, Dr. Aylard something, when he was asked about Taiwan, he didn't even want to acknowledge the existence of Taiwan. Now, this is the kind of rubbish which the WHO is meant to look after. It's the World Health Organization. It's not the World Health Politics Organization. So it's run like the World Health Politics Organization, unfortunately. So even when you have experts, they're usually conniving crooks who at some point need to be made to pay a price. All
Yes.
right, because when things are going fine, nobody holds anything up to them. But when things are going bad for you to have done all of this, that is where the real trouble comes in. As for the rest of the culpability, there's a lot of cases of individual culpability. For example, in Italy, it was this bunch of people who contracted the virus and then went skiing to Cortina and all of that. And that is why the spread area is mostly Lombardy and Emilia Romagna, the two neighboring provinces up north, where it's the absolute worst, and it's crossed 12,000 people. So in effect, the per day mortality that you're seeing coming out of Italy today is higher than the daily mortality that Italy suffered during World War II,
Wow. Wow. What a
which
perspective.
said a lot.
Yeah, it
Which
says
says a lot.
says
Cumulatively, when this whole thing from the beginning to the end, if you average out things, it's nearing. So, see, I did this calculation about 3 days back. In World War II, Italy lost about 272 people per day. They lost a total of 514,000 people totally. And if you, from the beginning of the campaign to the switch from Axis to Allied and then the end of the war, they lost about 272 people a day. 3 days back, they had lost about 172 people on average per day to Corona. But
wow.
if you look at the actual numbers daily coming in for the last 2 weeks, 850 plus every single day is something like what, 3-4 times the average that they lost in
World
World
War.
War II.
Correct.
So it's very, very scary numbers.
Yeah. No, the perspective puts in light the tragedy of this coronavirus, and the politics, I think, has to stay back. And in this program, my focus is on the diplomacy more. So here in this, like when you look at what happened now, Italy signed a $2.5 billion deal with China. Now, do you think that was a coercion or was a necessity or there was a lack of resources?
Look, it's just a lack of resources. When you're desperate, you go after whatever you can get, right? They had 2.5 billion. I mean, they needed something. Nobody else was willing to give it to them because they needed it for their own coronavirus spreads. And so the only thing you could do was go to the one person that was willing to offer it, even with that 60 to 80% failure rate. And we've seen minimum is 60% failure, maximum is 80% failure rate of Chinese products. You still didn't have a choice except to go for it. What are you going to do?
Yeah,
I mean, you're stuck. Beggars can't be choosers in this particular case. It's sad, but you really can't blame Italy much for this. At the same time, let's also be very, very clear. China is going to come out of this completely unscathed. It is going to lose a lot of goodwill. But remember, they're fantastic at bribing their way. They keep giving multi-page supplements to New York Times and Washington Post. So what you're going to end up seeing is that they'll take out a few more supplements. And then the role of every New York Times and Washington Post journalist will be to say, calling it China virus is racist. Then it will go to blaming China is racist.
yeah,
And so on and so forth. They will also remember the interdependence with China is so great that no country actually has the guts to call out China.
absolutely.
Tell me one government except the Japanese Deputy Prime Minister Taro Aso, who said it's not the World Health Organization, it's the China Health Organization. And that too, he was, it was more an oblique attack on China. It was more a direct attack on the WHO. Tell me one person that's called out China, even though we have seen clear evidence of their complicity, of the Chinese leadership's complicity in all of this. So, even from a diplomatic point of view, I'm not seeing China pay a heavy enough price for this. They will continue doing rubbish like this.
No, the people are totally, especially in the US, I'm talking about general people, not the Trump administration. Obviously, Trump administration has to put some decorum because they know more the reality on the ground than the rest of the people. But generally, Americans are now wary of China, generally speaking. If you're looking at the social media posts and the offbeat channels, like not the mainstream channels, then Americans are talking about openly. And this is the first time Americans are talking about sanctions. And it's not at the state level, it's more people at the ground level. Now, in your analysis, do you think that China even cares about it, or will it become a policy change of the US?
No, I don't think China cares about it, because who else is going to supply them with bulbs? Who
Absolutely.
else is going to supply them with toilet paper? Who else? I mean, I hear all these calls for boycotts. If you go in for a Samsung, you have about 50% Chinese components.
Chinese
If you
company.
go in for Apple, you've got 70%. Ask them to find me a cell phone that doesn't have Chinese components. Ask them to find me a computer that doesn't have Chinese components. It's impossible. So they'll say all these things in broadcasts, but realistically, can you cut China off? I think not.
No,
We'll hear all of this. I'm afraid it will never translate into anything concrete in policy terms.
absolutely, absolutely. And you rightly said about UNHCR. UNHCR is also one body heavily dominated by China because they're the ones who fund it. So so China gives around $300 million annually to US to UN, and US gives around $3.1 billion to UN. And you see all the opposition talks of all the people in UNHCR and WHO against US all the time. So are they more effective in communicating their viewpoint? Because I don't think so. Any other country gives. Islamic countries give very little money to the UN.
No, look, there's a set formula for how much you contribute based on how much you take, how much you deploy it, and all kinds of things like that. So it's not exactly, remember, the US also carries a lot more heft at the UN than China ever will.
Yeah.
China's only real heft is that it can veto, and it resorts to obnoxious bribery, which is why, they'll only choose people from countries with high bribery ratios. Like Ethiopia is known to be extremely corrupt. Eritrea is known to be extremely corrupt. So no wonder Dr. Teddy got made the chair of the WHO, because they're notorious for purchasing votes and things like that. They're this is what they do. So that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect also is China's role isn't as a norm setter, it's as a norm breaker. And unfortunately, what you'll see is that there will always be a lot more people willing to focus on the Chinese point of view because it's somehow different.
Mhm.
Whereas, it's the contrarian point of view, therefore it will get more publicity, which doesn't necessarily mean that China actually has more hands to play at the UN.
Mhm.
Remember, when China wants to mainstream someone, it can't. Till this day, China is not able to mainstream Pakistan's nuclear weapons program. When America set its mind to it, in spite of Chinese opposition, the Americans managed to mainstream our nuclear program in 2008. That's something China will never be able to do.
Yeah, I think they lack, one thing I've seen coming back to India, the people of India have a unique intellectual viewpoint, and which is coming from millions of years of culture. And I've seen that many, during this coronavirus, Indian community has emerged as a faith healer, as a hope giver, and all those things you have seen in American society. Do you think that India can play a bigger role in the world politics using diplomacy to become a healer in a way that people are traumatized by this coronavirus?
No, I don't think so. And I'll tell you why. We used to focus on all the soft power elements when our economy was weak and our military was weak. So Nehru, basically invented the industry of poverty porn and spirituality porn in that sense, simply because he was going on failing at the economy. He was going on failing at diplomacy and things like that. Remember, uh, if you are a strong enough power, you don't need a soft power projection wing.
Right.
America doesn't need a business council for the promotion of American movies. When you say movies, the default is American movies.
Yes.
They do, but China needs a council to promote its movies, right? India needs film festivals and things like that. Have you ever seen an American film festival in India?
Never.
Or anywhere in the world? No. But you'll see a Chinese film festival. You'll see an Iranian film festival. You'll see an American film festival. Why? So the very fact that we have the need for Yoga Day, and it has to be pushed as somehow as a state celebration, means that it's somehow lacking and it's not caught on enough, that you want it to be more aware, the world to be more aware. I think what's great is that the message that's going out from India is, and for me, I know the rest of the world sees this as a positive message. I actually see this as a negative message, and I'll tell you why in the second part of my answer. First is, that we have controlled this virus fairly well. Of course, the normal naysayers are going to keep saying that. I find it hilarious that the Atlantic and American newspapers keep running things on India's criminal response to COVID and whatnot. And then they're the ones with 200,000 cases. I mean, you've got some gall to be saying that it's like ulta chor kotwal ko dante kind of a situation, So that's number one. Remember, we have this paradigm of bulk healthcare. Our doctors have never had this thing for, extra care for a patient. It's all come quickly, we'll treat you immediately and get the hell out of here because we need that bed for the next person coming.
Correct.
So we're actually quite more fine-tuned to pandemics, and we trust because we also have natural epigenetic immunity, because, malaria and things like that, we are already treating them. So you already have a much higher level of immunity here. So that also, in a sense, helps in a way, right? It's a combination of, nothing's monocausal, everything's a combination of factors. So these are things probably for America to, look at a alternative pandemic treatment paradigm, if you want to call it that. As for faith and healing, I think the main thing is that, when we were told to get into our houses, we kind of got into our houses. We're quite obedient that way when it mostly needs to be, except that crazy god woman who was threatening police with a sword or something like that, and she got walloped and dragged off to jail, very correctly so. So, that's fine. But I think unlike these, transmission parties, there used to be this AIDS transmission parties where people actually used to have unprotected sex in America to get AIDS as if it was some kind of blessing or something like that. America has had these parties in Florida this time, COVID
Torture like.
transmission parties. Yeah, nonsense like that in Spain and Italy happening as well. We haven't had nonsense like that, right? So it's mostly been handled quite well. But I think the only real lesson for anyone from this is our pandemic treatment, how our bulk healthcare system, a quantity as opposed to quality healthcare system, copes with pandemics. I think that is the main lesson for the rest of the world to learn.
No, I think the world is very looking closely. And yesterday, I think due to Seema Verma, and she made a point of Ministry of Ayush in India, which promotes 7 different types of alternative medicine, and Unani, Siddha, Ayurveda, all the 7 types are there. So I think that has been caught up, that the India's response is not through just the Western allopathic medicine, but also the other systems have also played a big role. A country with the completely private health system has 35 million people in the US outside the health net, 35 million, which is 11% of the population. And the state doesn't have the resources because they don't have beds. So I think it will be a challenging time for US, especially the insurance sector, to manage this kind of surge. Now, my last question to you before I leave here is that, what is the advantage of the Hindu dharma community or dharma philosophy, which has also helped India to cope with such kind of pandemic? Is it, do you see, because that is what people are observing. And many people I met yesterday, I went out for a short time to some yoga studios, and many people told me that I think it's all about yoga and Ayurveda and other things, that you guys are safe. So, what is your viewpoint on that, please?
Look, I'm yet to see any proper medical study. Look, my training is all Occidental. I come from the Western school of academia. So I'm yet to see any hard result. India did have a tradition. We started vaccination before anybody else. And this is a British documentation.
Correct.
That, in Bengal, the barbers used to go around doing the vaccination against a whole range of diseases and things like that. I think because yoga and things like that are mostly preventative, they certainly help you lead a better lifestyle. I think the food habits are the main thing, which is why most of the diseases we contract here are they're not through eating and wet markets, they just happen. So, for example, pneumonia, the cholera epidemic that happened in the 1800s and things like that. It wasn't because we were eating all kinds of weird nonsense. And remember, this whole market started off in China because of communism. It was because of the Great Leap Forward and the famines and all of that, that this market for all kinds of weird nonsense started up. Yeah. So, I think that is definitely a contrast. But remember, all these contrasts are they're not going to get us anywhere, because ultimately your soft power is based on soft power is not a substitute for hard power. It's not a substitute for economic power. You first need to reverse this disastrous course of socialism we're going down, continuing to go down without any kind of abatement. So no socialism, grow. That is when your soft power also grows. And, again, ultimately, if you look at it, our economic policies haven't grown just the way Bollywood movies haven't grown. I think the first Bollywood movie that ever came out, Raja Harishchandra, it was a silent movie. But the first time we had a color, non-silent movie, it was still a variety entertainment show. There was family drama and there was dancing. Yeah. To this day, every movie has to have dances, singing, and family drama. Mm-hmm. In a way, it also reflects society, that your society hasn't advanced enough to have that division of labor. You can't have a thriller movie just based on the thrill. You have to have a little bit for everyone, because that is the nature of your market. It hasn't allowed that specialization and that value addition to happen. Unfortunately, I'm sorry I'm being so negative, but that's the reality of things.
No, you are absolutely right, and you pointed very correctly about the diplomatic win of some countries over coronavirus. And being an American Hindu, we also know our strengths and the priorities here. And in fact, we are also supporting coronavirus in the Indian government in a big way through our community here. So thank you, Abhijit. And it's always a pleasure to have you. And viewers, you must watch this video. It's got deep, deep insights into many things, including statistics and numbers. And Abhijit, it's always a pleasure. You're always welcome. You're like an expert on many things. And we'll stop this interview here. And namaskar. Thank you.
Thank you, Har Har Mahadev.
Har Mahadev.